The ship had been dead for 11 years. It sat in Dock 7 Omega of Harrow Station like a monument to something no one could quite name. Not grief, not failure, exactly, but something in between. A Veil-Theory vessel, sleek even in its ruin, hull the color of deep ocean pressed into metal, with organic curves that no human hand had designed. The docking authority had tagged it abandoned/unclaimable 7 years ago and promptly forgotten about it. Everyone forgot about it, except Mara Voss, who found it on a Tuesday and decided, for reasons she couldn't fully articulate even to herself, that it deserved better. Mara was 31, a certified independent mechanic with grease permanently embedded in her knuckles and a reputation on Harrow Station for fixing things that other people called unfixable. She wasn't famous. She wasn't exceptional in any way that made good stories. She paid her berth fees on time, kept her tools organized, and had a particular, almost personal discomfort with machines left to die. She'd grown up watching her father restore things. Old engines, broken looms, a derelict shuttle that everyone said was scrap and that he'd nursed back to life over 4 years of quiet, stubborn weekends. He used to say, "Everything that worked once can work again. You just have to listen to what it needs." Mara had never stopped believing that. The Veil-Theory ship needed a lot. She submitted the salvage inquiry on a Wednesday morning, paid the nominal claim fee, laughably small, because the docking authority genuinely expected her to gut it for parts, and began on Thursday. The exterior was worse than it looked from the dock entrance. Hull stress fractures ran in branching patterns across the port side, deep enough that she could see the secondary plating beneath. The bioluminescent guide strips, a Veil-Theory design feature she'd only read about, strips of organic material that pulsed like veins when the ship was healthy, were all dark. Power relays had corroded. The atmospheric seal had failed completely. She spent the first 3 days just cataloging. It wasn't a small ship. 60 meters bow to stern, built for a crew of perhaps 8. Though the layout was strange. Compartments she didn't immediately understand, passages that seemed to curve without structural reason, chambers with no obvious purpose. She sketched everything by hand in a battered notebook, her own form of comprehension, because you couldn't fix what you didn't understand. On the 4th day, she found the core chamber. It was in the deepest part of the ship, nested behind 3 bulkheads, accessible through a passage so narrow she had to turn sideways to navigate it. The door, if it could be called that, it was more like a membrane of hardened material, had no handle, no panel, no obvious mechanism. Mara studied it for 40 minutes. Then she found the pressure points, 6 of them, distributed in a pattern she recognized only because she'd seen Veil-Theory architectural photographs in a technical manual years ago, and pressed them in sequence. The membrane dissolved. Inside was a chamber roughly 4 meters across, perfectly circular, walls covered in dormant bioluminescent material that had gone the gray-white color of dead coral. In the center, suspended in what had once been an active stasis field and was now simply stopped, was something she had absolutely no frame of reference for. It was approximately the size of a large dog, coiled tightly on itself, scales the color of deep violet and old starlight. For limbs tucked close to a lean body. A head with architecture that suggested both intelligence and antiquity. Wings, she counted them twice, folded in overlapping layers along its back. A dragon, not a metaphor. Not an alien species that happened to resemble one distantly. A dragon, as if the universe had decided, in one particular corner of Veil-Theory biology, to simply build the thing that human mythology had always suspected existed somewhere. It was alive. Barely. Its chest rose and fell in intervals so long she had to watch for nearly a minute before she was certain. The scales were dry, dull, several of them cracked at the edges. The stasis field that should have been maintaining it had been running on emergency power, power that had been failing for 11 years. Mara stood in the doorway of the chamber and processed this for a long moment. Then she went and got her tools. She didn't know she was saving its life. That was the important part. That was the thing that mattered. Later, when everything else unfolded, she thought she was fixing a ship. The stasis chamber's power systems were tied directly to the main reactor, which was tied to the power relays, which were corroded. Fix the relays, restore the reactor, restore the stasis field. That was the logic. She wasn't thinking about the creature. She was thinking about the system the chain of cause and effect, the elegant mechanical truth that everything in a functional vessel depended on everything else. She worked for 19 hours straight. Harrow Station's secondary market yielded 3 of the 4 relay components she needed. Veil Theory tech was old but not rare, and the station's salvage district had deep shelves. The 4th component she fabricated herself, spending 6 hours at her bench with raw conductive material and a calibration tool, building something that had never precisely existed before because she needed it to and she was good enough to make it. She installed the fabricated relay at 0340 station time, alone in the dark of Dock 7 Omega, lying on her back under a panel that smelled of oxidized metal and old circuitry. The reactor kicked. Not dramatically, no surge, no dramatic hum. Just a low, steady pulse of returning power, moving through the ship's systems the way blood moves when circulation is restored. She heard things come alive around her in sequence. A ventilation whisper, a faint harmonic from the bioluminescent strips beginning to recover, the deep background vibration of a vessel remembering what it was built to do. In the core chamber, the stasis field reactivated. Mara didn't know this yet. She was lying under the panel, checking her calibration readings and eating a protein bar. Kalen arrived 6 days later. He came in a small courier vessel, docked without announcement, and walked into Dock 7 Omega with the careful movement of someone who had been hoping for something and was afraid to believe they'd found it. He was Veil Theory, tall, angular, with the gray-silver skin of his people and eyes that caught light the way prisms did, refracting rather than simply reflecting. He stopped when he saw the ship. He stood there for a long time. The bioluminescent strips were at roughly 40% recovery, pulsing in slow waves along the hull. The hull fractures had been sealed with compound she'd mixed herself. Not Veil Theory standard, but structurally sound, maybe sounder. The port side was clean. The atmospheric seal was holding. "Who?" he said, to no one in particular, "did this?" "I did." Mara emerged from beneath the starboard access panel, wiping her hands on a cloth. "You know this ship?" Kalen looked at her with an expression she couldn't fully interpret. "She was my mother's ship," he said. "She disappeared 11 years ago. We were told the vessel was destroyed. We searched." He stopped. Started again. "We searched for 3 years." Mara thought about 11 years of a reactor failing by degrees. A stasis field running on dying emergency power. Something alive inside, maintained by the barest margin of what the ship could still provide. "There's something you need to see," she said. She led him to the core chamber. He stopped in the doorway, and the sound he made was quiet and sharp and not quite any language she recognized. He crossed the chamber in 3 steps and stood before the stasis field, and his hands, pressed flat against the containment barrier, were shaking. "Vera," he said. The name landed in the room differently than other words. It had weight. "She is alive," Kalen said. It wasn't a question. He was reading the field indicators with the fluency of someone who had grown up knowing what they meant. "She is. The field is stable. She is stable." He turned to look at Mara. "How long has it been like this?" "The field reinitiated 6 days ago. I restored main power to the reactor." Mara paused. "I didn't know she was in here when I started. I found her on day 4. By then the repair sequence was already underway." Kalen was quiet for a moment. The field had been failing. For a long time. Based on the power decay rate, I'd estimate she had. Mara did the calculation she'd done at 0340 station time, lying under the panel. "Maybe another 72 hours. He looked at her. "You did not know what you were saving," he said. "I was fixing a ship. You were saving a Varen." He said the word carefully. "The Varen are, there is no adequate translation. They are not pets. They are not companions, exactly. They are the living memory of Veil Theory lineages. Vera has carried my family's history for 200 years. His voice was controlled, deliberate, the voice of someone maintaining composure through significant effort. "She is the last. The others are gone. If she had." He stopped. "She didn't," Mara said. "The revival took 4 days. Kalen handled the biological systems, the field reduction, the temperature calibration, the biochemical rebalancing that required knowledge Mara didn't have. Mara handled everything mechanical, monitoring the power output, adjusting the reactor load, ensuring the ship's systems maintained the precise environmental conditions Kalen specified. They worked in the same space without friction. Two people who understood their respective domains completely and had enough sense to stay in them. On the fourth day, Vera opened her eyes. They were gold. Not amber, not yellow, gold, the specific color of light through ancient glass, and they moved with an intelligence that was immediately, unmistakably evident. She looked at Kalen first, and something passed between them that Mara had no language for and didn't try to name. Then Vera looked at Mara. The gaze lasted perhaps 10 seconds. Mara, who was not easily unsettled, felt something in it that she would spend considerable time afterward trying to describe and ultimately couldn't. Not threat, not warmth, exactly. Something older than either. Recognition, maybe, though recognition of what, she couldn't say. Vera made a sound. Low, resonant, felt as much as heard, and lowered her head briefly. What does that mean? Mara asked. Kalen was quiet for a moment. In 200 years, he said, I have never seen her do that for anyone outside my family. Mara looked at the dragon, at Vera, the last living memory of a Veiltheri lineage, gold-eyed and ancient and alive, and thought about her father restoring a shuttle that everyone said was scrap. Everything that worked once can work again. You just have to listen to what it needs. She needed a new relay, Mara said simply. I had the parts. The galaxy is full of things that seem like coincidence. A mechanic with a notebook and a discomfort with abandoned machines. A dock fee so cheap no one else bothered. A fabricated component built at 0340 station time by someone too stubborn to call a job unfinishable. 72 hours. The margin between the last living memory of an ancient lineage and silence. Humanity has a habit of this. Of fixing things not because they understand the full weight of what they're fixing, but because something in them simply cannot walk past a broken thing and leave it broken. The universe, on occasion, arranges for this to matter enormously. Vera remembered. That was what the Varen did. They remembered. She would remember this, too.